Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shane, your Nappy Chef. So today, what I'm going to do is a parent's guide for watching Black Panther. So this is a major spoiler. If you haven't already seen the movie, you may want to watch it and then come back. So the reason I'm doing it this way is because I saw it with my kids, and it brought up a lot of discussions about who the hero was, who the true villain was in the picture. So I want to get into it right now. I do want to give a lot of credit to the director and writer for crafting what I think is a brilliant film and being able to talk about some very difficult subjects in a way that was still entertaining and should foster a lot of conversation to advance some of the issues that we're experiencing today. So what I would start off with is Eric Killmonger's character. The final line that he made in the film when he was injured by T'Challa, and he said that T'Challa said, "Hey, you know, we can heal you." And he looked at him just like, "Bruh, you just don't get it. You know, I believe in. I'm willing to die for what I believe in, unlike you were, and I just bury my body in the ocean with my ancestors, who felt death, who preferred death than to live in bondage." So for me, that really explains everything that you need to know about Eric Killmonger's character, who was actually a black revolutionary that wanted to overthrow the system of white supremacy. And so that's kind of where I'll begin the conversation. Now, the way the film opens up, it starts off in it gives you a brief history of the Wakanda. The movie does an excellent job of world building, and it shows a fictional place in Africa, a country in Africa that is a black separatist nation that has existed for centuries. Seems like it's modeled off of, I want to say Timbuktu. And what I want to try to also in this review is give you reference points so you can do your own research and again have some conversations about how this fictionalized country in Africa may have resembled some of the great empires that actually did exist. There were real Wakandas, not as technologically advanced, but for the day, probably on the equivalent. There's a great author named Ivan Van Sertima. He wrote a book called They Came Before Columbus. And I would urge you to either Google him or YouTube him, listen to what he had to say about ancient Africans that were maritime experts, and they traveled the world in ships prior to anybody traveling to the Americas, and there's physical evidence that can prove that they existed. We also want to look at ancient cities like Mali, Songhai, and Ghana that listed for centuries, much longer than Roman empires stood for thousands of years. And the richest man in the world, Mansa Musa, Timbuktu. It seems like that's what Wakanda was modeled after. So that kind of gives you the introduction of world building. The first scene that I think is important is you're introduced to Eric Killmonger as a little kid who's playing basketball in not Compton, California. It's Oakland, California, which is the birthplace of the actual Black Panther movement, founded by Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton. And I believe the location where it's set, that's the actual building of the Black Panther movement. And we'll show some images behind me. And they founded the Black Panther movement to, first of all, it was to help women and children, to feed them. And their program is kind of what the school lunch is based off of now. That everybody, that you shouldn't have kids in the neighborhood going hungry. And that was the genesis of this pro-black movement. And then they address other issues like police brutality, some of the things that we're still dealing with today. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But so it's 1992. You enter the apartment and you see of his father, who is in Jobo. And you see on the TV screen an image of the Rodney King beating. Is either the beating or the verdict. A lot of people don't know who Rodney King was, especially kids who may be 13 or just now seeing the movie. Even my kids didn't know who Rodney King was. So Rodney King was a unarmed black motorist that was brutally beaten by a number of a number of police officers in Los Angeles, and it was caught on videotape. The person that filmed it gave it to a local news station and made national news. There's a trial, and the police officers were acquitted when there's this clear video of evidence that they were beating him, calling him, names. It was a racial event, and they let the cops go. Kind of some stuff like we're seeing today, right? And then there was it was 6 days of riots that took the lives of over 50 people, millions of dollars in property damage, and they had to call out the National Guard to restore order. And so it kind of, if you look at what's happening today with the protests, with the Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, again, that's about police drawing attention to police brutality, something that this country has dealt with for a number of years. You look at Black Lives Matter. So it speaks to that condition. And all of these issues, they're not new issues that the black community has been dealing with for decades, if not centuries. The police were founded originally as slave catchers. So, a group of people would get together and they'd go catch runaway slaves. That's the origin of what the modern day police department is today. So there's always been this great tension about how policing is carried out in America. And now we're facing over policing, mass incarceration. So, and that's the conversation that in Jobo, Eric Killmonger's father is having with his older brother, who is the current Black Panther, T'Chaka. So what happens, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. In Jobo, they're planning, I can only assume they're going to participate in the riots. That's why they have guns. They're concerned that the feds are coming up, but in Jobo knows that it's actually the Wakandans showing up. His older brother shows up as the Black Panther, whose name is T'Chaka. And his older brother asks, "Why did you betray Wakanda?" He says that I did no such thing. In Jobo does. So what happened in Wakanda, there was an attack by we'll call him the mini villain, Ulysses Claw, who's a white mercenary that went into Wakanda, stole vibranium. Supposedly an ounce or a dime size worth of vibranium is about $20,000. So the value would be upwards of $12 million. That was stolen. It killed a lot of people in an explosion to escape. And so this guy, Ulysses S. Claw, throughout the story will be public enemy number one. So the older brother T'Chaka is confronting Njobo about, why did you show this man where we hide our vibranium is, where Wakanda is. You've betrayed the country. You need to go back go back to Wakanda and answer for your treasonous activities. And he explains that the reason that he showed Claw where it's like, I've been on a war dog assignment. War dog assignment is a group of Wakandians that infiltrate different countries, and they're only identifiable by a fluorescent tattoo on the inside of the bottom lip. And explains that on my assignment, I've observed as long as I could all the oppression that these people are suffering from, specifically in Oakland, California. He says community has suffered by a plague of drugs that's been introduced. They've suffered because of police brutality, domestic terrorism. Their leaders have been assassinated. What am I'm leaving out? Okay, drugs, leaders assassinated. They've been over-policed and are suffering from mass incarceration, right? So he says Wakanda has the technology that can liberate these people under this system of white supremacy that they're suffering from. T'Chaka wants nothing to do with that. And he had another spy whose name is Zuri, that will be Forrest Whitaker's character, who reveals himself that he was spying on his friend Njobo. Uh, Njobo is angry, pulls a gun on Zuri. The Black Panther of that time, T'Chaka, kills Njobo, who also happens to be his brother. He tells Zuri, we're not going to talk about this ever again, so it's a secret that they hide. And he abandons his nephew, who's downstairs, 8-year-old kid, 9-year-old kid playing basketball. And that's Eric Killmonger's character. They get in their spaceship, fly off. Eric runs up the steps, finds his father dying. He can see that he's wounded from the panther claw wounds in his chest, and holds him, and he dies in his arms. And so that kind of sets up the whole story about why Eric would have issue with Wakanda. And there are additional issues like that. So, and it also informs of oh, before I forget, Njobo did look out the window downstairs at his son, and it's an homage to a poster you may have seen of Malcolm X. And the quote says, by any means necessary. The full quote is, liberate your mind by any means necessary. So it informs you of the mindset of that Njobo understands and empathizes with Black Americans and how they've suffered under the system of white supremacy, particularly in this period of the 90s. And since they're bringing in real-world events, 1988 would have been the year that a rap group called NWA released an album called, I have to bleep it out, but "Fuck the Police." So they've been living under under domestic terrorism for years. And I'll talk about a little bit later about some of the other forms of oppression that Black people suffered that informs us why Eric Killmonger, as a grown man, is so enraged and filled with fury and wants and is seeking revolution. This concept of revolution, by the way, is something that absolutely the real Black Panthers embraced, and they wanted liberation, but they wanted to be protected in their own communities. One of the things that they did is that when police would stop a motorist, they would patrol their own neighborhoods, and they were armed. There's interviews that you look on YouTube about officers that they behaved a lot differently when they were under the watchful eye of the Black Panthers, who were legally armed to protect people in their community, so that you don't have an incident. Today, you might think of them as a Sandra Bland incident, or Freddie Gray, or Eric Gardner. All these people that have died in police custody mysteriously, and the police officers are never held accountable. That was happening back in the 60s, even older than that. Again, out of the legacy of these are slave catchers. So, where did I leave off? I have to pause right there. Okay, so that gives us the backstory of Eric Killmonger, why he felt the way he did about Wakanda. Now, we will learn later that he has a genius level intellect, educated at MIT, graduated from Annapolis, and then would be in various theaters of war, Iraq and Afghanistan, where he received his training as a Navy SEAL to overthrow governments. Okay, so the next scene that we're exposed to is T'Chaka's character. T'Challa character, which is the Prince of Wakanda, who's becoming the new Black Panther. His father was murdered. We get some flashbacks from the previous movie, and he's on a mission because he's going to be coronated the next day, and he goes into Nigeria. And this is where the imagery, where the film begins to attack Black men and demonize them against Black women. You're not given really any positive images of Black men in the movie and how they interact with Black women. You're shown a Boko Haram, which is a terrorist organization that's kidnapped some African females, where another character, T'Challa's girlfriend, is embedded again on a war dog assignment. He becomes Black Panther, rescues her, or attempts to rescue her, kind of messes up the mission a little bit, and the mission has to be saved by the general who's also another black female named Okoye. She saves the mission, and T'Challa is kind of presented as like a joke character. You know, he's introduced as someone who freezes in battle. She warns him not to freeze. He did freeze. When they return to Wakanda in the next scene, when the mother greets him, the mother's first question about, well, did he freeze? So he's not very good in battle or reliable, which is it's a lot different when you think how other Marvel characters or superheroes are portrayed, particularly when they return from battle. I think about Thor's first movie when he comes back to Asgard and meets his father Odin and is saying he's ready to be king. It's glorious. Not so with this hero, with this Black Panther. It's like a joke. His baby sister actually flips him off, right? Shoots him a bird. So there's no respect for this guy. Pretty much whatsoever. That's our introduction to T'Challa's character. The next scene, we're introduced to the grown Eric Killmonger, who enters a museum. I forget the location. I'll put that in here. Enters a museum, and he's looking at various antiquities and is asking the curator about them. Different masks. There's an axe. And the security is following him around the museum, which he takes notice of. And what's odd about the scene, he says, he corrects the curator and says, these artifacts aren't where you think they're from. They're actually Wakandan. They actually belong to my people. Your people stole them. The British did. And he says they didn't pay a fair price. And you can hear a lot of people in the theater like, that's right, and we agree with that. So it's really brilliant the way that the writers characterize. Here's a person who is, his belongings are being guarded by the real thieves that took them, and he points it out. So, and what this is talking about, where I think you might want to have a discussion, is there's a book called Stolen Legacy, and it talks about different inventions or creations by African people from the diaspora that white people have taken credit for. And those would be things like astronomy, mathematics, art, transportation, maritime travel, number of inventions. We can look at music, rhythm, things that they've, it's called cultural appropriation today, but it's really just theft. So one of the great examples I think would be Sir Isaac Newton, as somebody who would disappear for 12 years at a time, and then come back, and he's created calculus. What he was doing, he was studying in Africa at the School of Egyptian Mysteries, where he learned that, and then he would take credit for it. Medicine is another example. The cradle of civilization happened in Kemet, in these great dynasties that we know as Africa today, or countries in Africa, which made it. It's not, Africa isn't place. It's actually 54 separate countries. But the stolen legacy aspect is discussed in that literature. I can do that better. So Eric Killmonger corrects the curator and says, no, these are actually Wakandan artifacts or things of antiquities that your people stole. They didn't pay for them. They actually belong to me. So it's an interesting play that he is saying you're actually the thief here. And there's a great book called Stolen Legacy that will highlight some additional information on antiquities, inventions that were stolen, culturally appropriated from European culture when they were inventions of the societies in these African countries. I mean, we can list mathematics, science, philosophy, astronomy, maritime travel. A good example would be Sir Isaac Newton, who disappeared, I think it was like 12 years, while he was studying at one of these Egyptian mystery schools, and then comes back to Europe and claims to have invented calculus. One of the people that we look at as a math, one of the fathers of modern math. So, brilliant scene. So what happens in that scene, the character Claw, Ulysses as Claw, is there, and that's the person that attacked Wakanda 30 years ago, and he helps Eric Killmonger take back the artifact. He murders everybody in the museum. We're also introduced to Eric's girlfriend. I believe in the name, she's in the credits. Her name is Linda. In the comic book, it's Madam Slay. But that's so they go outside and kiss, so you know that that's his romantic interest. Um, the next scene would be gold teeth. Okay. Oh, and the character Killmonger, he has a certain amount of swag. So he's not presented as Wakandian. You know that he's like an American black. He's adopted that culture. He has gold some gold teeth. So that's how he's being presented. Oh, and very important, he takes a mask that has some devil horns in it, and that becomes important later because this is some of the visual cues that the audience is given to say that here's a guy that you're supposed to hate. He's supposed to be the villain, even though the things that he's espousing, like we just talked about, with well, you're the one that stole my stuff, but he's supposed to be the villain, right? So the next scene would be the T'Challa. He's being coronated in a ritualistic combat. So what happens is that he drinks some kind of potion, and the quote-unquote powers of the Black Panther are supposed to be stripped away. Now, again, the mountain tribe comes down and says that, this is a boy who's unfit to lead you. His daughter, his sister even scoffs at tradition. So he says that without his cat suit and claws, right, without his tech, he's just a he can't win. He can't protect you. He's just a boy. And later, there's some other evidence that we'll get into that he does not have superhuman abilities. However, he does win the fight. He is crowned as king, and then he goes to a ritual to eat a heart-shaped herb that's supposed to restore the panther powers. I think what it actually does is just causes you to hallucinate. He has some memories about his father, T'Chaka, and his father tells him it's hard to be a good king and a good man at the same time, which is some foreshadowing when the Black Panther or Prince T'Challa, you know what I'm trying to say, Prince T'Challa will later learn about how flawed his father actually was, being the ruler of Wakanda and acting as a monarch that was aware of the atrocities that are happening in the world and stood by and did nothing to do about them, including going after this mercenary claw when they have all the technology in the world to do so. So just to pause there for a minute, you have to think that they've sat by and watched the Trayvon Martin things happen. They've sat down and watched the King assassinated, Kennedy assassinated, Medgar Evers, Emmett Till, all these examples of injustices that have happened to African Americans, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland. So they watched that in the current era, but even in the previous era, they've watched. Let me back up a little bit and go back to how old Wakanda is supposed to be. So Wakanda existed through slavery. So if you start with the beginning of what is known as the Black Holocaust, where the original Jews, Hebrew Jews, fled out of from Roman persecution into East Africa, eventually settling into West Africa. These Hebrews, they couldn't be distinguished by the Europeans from Africans, but Africans could distinguish who the Hebrews were. And they were, because of the tribal warfare, sold into bondage. In fact, many would argue that the people who were sold into slavery are actually under a curse, a biblical curse that I'm going to read is Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. It says, the Lord will send you back in ships to Egypt on a journey I said you should never make again. Then you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. So what that's saying is that Egypt for Hebrews was a house of bondage. That's what that word means. And so to be sold into Egypt again on ships, it means you're going to go into bondage again as slaves. The new Egypt would have been the Americas or the slave trade. So there's no other people on the face of the planet that experienced that other than the Hebrews that were involved in the slave trades, or Africans that were taken out of their homeland and put in cargo ships and sold as property. So that's the curse that the Wakandans sat by and watch occur. So they watched the slave trade. They watched parts of their neighbors be colonized by Europeans. They watched or were aware of the atrocities that happened in the Americas with hardcore chattel slavery. They were aware of the Middle Passage, and I'll talk about that later. They are aware that the leaders of the America, people who celebrate it today, the original presidents were actually slave owners as well. So they're aware of all those atrocities. They were aware of when Reconstruction failed. They were aware of the what happened in the Civil War. They were aware of all the slave insurrections that happened for people who wanted to get out of slavery, and there were many hundreds of them, right? And Wakandians, this fictional country, sat back and watched and didn't help, right? So, and what's birthed out of the slave insurrections is this fear that we'll come to comprehend and understand a little bit later. But that's where we get revolution from. So revolution, those slave revolts, it's the exact same thing, and they're very violent, and it brings up memories, and there's a real fear that Europeans have about, what's justifiable, about wanting to be, not to live as an oppressed people, and you'll do anything to get out of that situation. They were aware of the black codes that came out of after the civil rights, where these laws were put on. They were aware of convict leasing, things that were used to disenfranchise freed slaves and put them back into bondage. They were aware of, let's see, I said the black codes. They were aware of convict leasing. They were aware of the Jim Crow South. They were aware of the civil rights movements, where we saw those assassinations of Malcolm X and King and Martin, where they were not involved. And then that brings us up into the present day with mass incarceration, drug wars that have been used to reverse things, where Malcolm X gave a very good speech called The Ballad of the Bullet, where they argued for freedom. It's like you have a choice. We can either vote and participate in this experiment of self-governance, or there's a ballot, which is a natural response to domestic terrorism and being an oppressed people. And Wakandians sat by and watched this under the rulership of King T'Chaka, the father. So the next thing that we get to after that ceremony that we discussed is his advice to his son was, you need to make sure that you surround yourself with people that you can trust. And we notice in the background that even though his powers should have been restored, he still has a guard behind him. And that's kind of some clues to give you that this Black Panther, his powers are more like Tony Stark's, and they come from tech, and not necessarily from some mystical Panther spirit bast or bow, right? So they decide that they need to go get the Claw. So since he did the robbery, they caught footage of him, and they want to go get him. And the sequence, pretty much, I'll talk about that later. It was very nice that what Marvel and Disney were able to do. It was action-packed, and it really highlighted the women as being more aggressive, and they were actually the warriors in society, which really flips things on its head and is out of order as far as like our community. It really speaks to male masculinity and effeminizing men who are supposed to naturally, in all other areas of nature, the naturally protectors of the families. But in this society, the females are presented to be more aggressive. The action scenes are phenomenal, but it does expose again that without his suit, T'Chaka's really a regular guy who makes some very poor decisions. So when he is, and he's not respected by the CIA agent Ross that we're introduced to. It's a white CIA agent, and he speaks as far as this being a ruler or a king of a country. He doesn't show any deference, and he is really rude to the king. We also are reintroduced to the Claw character, who in this movie he represents. I think Claw is like a play on words. It's the Klan. So It's really racist white people that rename themselves every few years because they're made to feel uncomfortable about being racist. So that's the alt-right conservative movement. And when he interacts with T'Chaka, he refers to him as boy. I'm sorry. He refers to uh, Eric Killmonger as boy, and when he talks to Prince T'Challa, he calls him a savage, and he says he's not deserving. His country, they're not deserving of the resources that they have, and that is a real belief on that side that the people who are born on the richest place with all the minerals and resources are in some way undeserving of the things that they have, which is a very bizarre concept. Some of the authors that are listening here will expand on that a little bit more, particularly Dr. Francis Welsing, who explains that it has to do with when these men in the ancient days would get into ships and travel the world and sleep with women from different cultures. They couldn't reproduce themselves the same way that a black man could with any other. So if you have a black man sleeps with a woman, that baby's going to be black. It's going to look like him. White person sleeps with a black woman. It's going to look like the black woman. So that has to do with a recessive gene. So, and that's part of that mindset about not deserving the blessings of the planet. So basically, cause of racism. So what happens in that scene? Again, the women are very aggressive and warrior-like. They lose their car, and something I really didn't enjoy about the movie. They didn't meet the white CIA agent, but he pulls up to them like they're prostitutes and tells them to get in the car, and they get in the car. So it's a very bizarre scene. So they get the claw. The Wakandans actually capture him. Oh, and the other thing that was really messed up is that he goes to, after he calls him a savage and realizes that he can't beat him physically, he appeals to his ego and calls him king. He says, Mercy King, who really doesn't mean it. But T'Challa stops and doesn't kill him. Now, I can't think of any other times where the superhero has been concerned about not being seen taking out the villain who had just killed a bunch of people in the casino, shot him, insulted him, did all these things, but he's told, like, the world is watching, don't kill him. Who cares? So what? I mean, it's very unusual that for this particular case, the black superhero is not allowed to take out the supervillain because people are looking. The guy's a murderer. He should have took him out. And not to mention that he's, again, public enemy number one. Should have taken him back to Wakanda, but again, bad decision making. Prince T'Challa not wanting to offend the white CIA agent. They go back to a headquarters in South Korea. So they're on equal footing. But again, the CIA agent Ross, is being very disrespectful to T'Challa, hits him on the shoulder. Again, no respect for his position as ruler or king. And T'Challa is being very submissive and like a beta male. And the Agent Ross is being alpha male. And it's just pretty much running the show. We get another clue that T'Challa doesn't really have any superhero powers because he puts a bug on Agent Ross's shoulder and he goes in. So the Black Panther doesn't have super hearing. And he makes another bad decision. His general said, hey, we can't have these two Europeans getting in the same room and have a conversation because one of them knows where Wakanda is. He's going to tell all our secrets, which he does. T'Challa, again, not wanting to offend the CIA agent, lets him go in there and they have the conversation, and what she feared would happen actually does happen. So his girlfriend, Nakia, is perceptive enough to know that something's not right with this situation. Eric Killmonger shows up, frees the claw, breaks him out, and in doing so, he's shooting up the police station. The white CIA agent dives in front of T'Challa's girlfriend, Nakia, and saves her from getting shot with a bullet. Now, if this Black Panther had superpowers, he should be the one who has the ability to sense and perceive and react quicker than anybody else, but obviously he doesn't. And so this sets up a very bizarre scenario, which the Black Panther, the cartoon or the comic book Black Panther, is partnering up with a white CIA agent, the U.S. government. That was, now if we go back into the real world, the Black Panthers would have never partnered with CIA agents because they're responsible for arresting, detaining, disrupting their movement. They stood by while drugs were pumped into the community. So it's a very bizarre dynamic that the producers of the movie chose to go with to try to flip things on their head. And I'm sure that a lot of people who have seen the film, who are young, don't know who the real Black Panthers were. That's being the founders, Bobby Seale, Huey P. Newton, and what they stood for against police brutality and against government, domestic terrorism and government oppression. So this allows the that's very strange on there. So anyway, the Black Panther, he pursues Eric Killmonger, who now has the Claw, public enemy number one. Remember, the Claw blew up and killed a lot of people in Wakanda and stole millions of dollars worth of their resources. But for some reason, he runs back to check on the CIA agent, who he doesn't really know. And he's so concerned that he abandons his mission that he promised his friend that he'd bring back the murderer of his parents to face justice. He's also very specific when he asks about that. It's like, I want you to either kill him, the Claw, or bring him back for justice. And T'Challa is very deliberate, saying that, well, I'll bring him back. I'm not going to kill him, which is an interesting choice. So, so he puts one of these vibranium beads in the back of the CIA agent, Agent Ross, to stabilize him. His general warns him, you can't take this man back to Wakanda. You can't. That's against everything that we've done, because it's a secret closed society. He's a soldier. That was his choice to sacrifice himself, and reminds him of his duty to his countrymen. But he chooses this to save this white CIA agent. And what's that's known of it is called meritorious manumission, and it's a concept where a slave could gain his freedom if he did one of this is a real law that's passed in Virginia. And Dr. Claude Anderson talks about meritorious manumission, that a slave could gain his freedom if he told on other black people that were trying to escape, if they made an invention, if they saved the person's property, or if they slaved the slave owner's life. And so it's when we get back to Wakanda, the Black Panther is kind of hovering over Agent Ross to make sure he's okay. And he doesn't leave until his baby sister says he'll live. Black Panther is Reed. So it's a concept of meritorious manumissions, which again shows you how weak of a character this is and how sympathetic he is towards preserving the system of white supremacy by partnering with a CIA agent versus Eric Killmonger's, who's about a liberation movement and about revolution and overthrowing the system of white supremacy. So we look at Killmonger. He's talking with the Claw. He says, I want to go back Wakanda. The Claw insults him again and calls him, he says, boy, why do you want to go back? A number again, the people who aren't old enough should know that that's a clear insult. You don't call a grown man a boy, but that's an insult dating back to slavery times, referring to men as boys. So Eric Killmonger shoots the pilot. The Claw takes his girlfriend hostage. Now this is where, and he described them as like a Bonnie and Clyde. So they were a couple, and Eric Killmonger, his girlfriend Linda, we'll call her Linda, says, I'm sorry. And I believe she's saying that because this is a conversation that they've had before. And they knew if this situation ever occurred that, sacrifices had to be made. It's a hard choice. And she's apologizing to him that I can't go on with you to complete this revolution. And I can't, I'm sorry that you must do what you have to do in order, because they're both of them are committed revolutionaries. And he assures her, he says, it's all right, right? And he kills her in order to eventually kill the Claw. Before he kills the Claw, however, he does reveal, Claw calls his people again savages by showing the scar or a brand on his neck. Killmonger shows that he has these scarifications on his arm and explains that they're each is for a kill that he's had to make. We'll learn later that he has kills all over his body based on the amount of scarifications. And those scars come from a country or a nation or a tribe in Africa that I'll list down here that is part of their culture. But when he talks about having those scars, there's regret in that. But it's again part of the sacrifices that he's had to make in order to overthrow the system of white supremacy. So after he kills the Claw, he takes the Claw back to Wakanda and presents them to the council. He delivers public enemy number one, and he challenges T'Challa for the throne. And he's already been identified as he's of royal blood. He has his grandfather's ring. He calls T'Challa out and says, "Your father's a murderer. He murdered my father, his own brother," and shows evidence of that. And then there's a very interesting dialogue that takes place where you know exactly where Eric Killmonger stands. He says, "I'm about revolution. I'm about liberating the people." And it's interesting that he's brought to the council chamber in bondage, in chains. His father, there's a dream sequence that happens a little bit later in the film where his father was concerned that he wouldn't be welcomed back, even though he gave him a key, the ring and the tattoo in his lip, that he wouldn't be welcomed back into his homeland. And Eric Killmonger, he says, as a child, he says, "Well, why can't they find us? Why can't they find me? I'm right here. I'm physically present. My experiences are real. They should be able to see me. Wakanda should be able to find us." But then as a grown man, he realizes that it's not us that are lost. It's the Wakandians that are lost, the ones who have embraced this notion of maintaining a society when there's so many oppressed people in the world, which I thought was very brilliant writing. But again, going back to the exchange between T'Challa and Eric Killmonger, Eric says, he chastises the Wakandians. He says, "You're living up here comfortably. There are 2 billion people around the world that look exactly like us, black people, right? Whose lives are much harder." T'Challa makes it very clear that those aren't my people. We're not responsible for them. So who's the real villain? When you think about it, right? So here's a person, a superpower that has the ability to help but chooses not to. They have no reason not to help, or other than to preserve their way of life, which is actually benefiting from the system of white supremacy. So he's just like his father, who didn't seek justice from getting the Claw. It's about maintaining the system of white supremacy. In fact, he leaves his throne. Again, he's followed by the guards because he doesn't have really any superpowers, and they know it. That's why they got to protect him. And he whispers to Eric Killmonger. He says, "I don't even care that you brought the Claw here, that you brought public enemy number one. I would kill you if I didn't know who you were." And it makes you question, why would you kill this guy who's done nothing to the Wakandians other than bring a mass murderer to justice? So you're going to kill this man who's your blood relative, right? And you don't care about him bringing the mass murderer to justice. So it's some very clear lines of drawn there, and that's why it's the movie can be confusing depending on what perspective you're approaching it from. If you are oppressed people, obviously Killmonger's your hero, clearly, despite the fact of the different techniques that the editors of the movie took to try to demonize and show him as the villain when he's actually a liberator of oppressed people who wants liberation. T'Challa, who has demonstrated himself as being a very ineffective, weak character up to this point, without the ability to save his father, who hasn't demonstrated the ability to save his girlfriend, who's really relying on tech, who makes bad decisions, who freezes in battle, is not a good leader. Oh, and I did want to talk about his throne. There's a picture of the real Black Panther throne that the Wakandians, they would have looked at what Bobby Seale or Huey Newton sat in and modeled their throne after, which I thought was a nice touch. But the real Black Panther, T'Challa, is against the liberation of black people throughout the world, and he says so clearly. He's like, I'm about maintaining the status quo. I don't want to overturn it. I don't care that you brought a white supremacist to justice. I'd rather you be dead, which is bizarre. So Eric Killmonger, he questions him again and challenges him and says, What do you mean you're not the ruler or leader of these people? Didn't civilization, everybody begin here? And his mother interrupts because she's benefiting from the system of white supremacy as well, and says, "Don't engage him anymore." You know, he says, "Ask me who I really am," and he reveals that he's the son of their first cousin, and that he is Wakandian, and he does challenge for the throne as his birthright. Uh, and I think that it comprises probably one of the most important scenes in the movie. That if you don't explore it uh, in depth and have those conversations about why does Eric Killmonger have this rage in him, this fury, what informs him, and why does he do what he does, and explain in the darkness of the movie theater, you hear a lot of people going, mm-hmm, because they're rocking with Eric. They get it, right? The domestic terrorism is real, to this current day. The fact that police brutality exists, and you guys stood back and watch, is real. The civil rights struggle is real. The Middle Passage struggle is real. Stolen legacy is real. This theft of culture, including people, is real, and nothing has been, and that situation has been corrected. Apartheid, which happened in South Africa, was real, modeled after how blacks were being treated in the United States. Apartheid got their cues from the United States, how it's treated. Even if you look at the Jewish Holocaust, the Nuremberg race papers, I think that's it. I'll put the book here. But they modeled their system of oppressing the people that call themselves Jews, Jewish people, after how the Americans or Europeans were treating the descendants of slaves in Americas. So that informs us everything we need to know about who the liberator is, who the hero is of oppressed people versus the son of a monarch who has just kind of hit the genetic lottery and inherited this rulership. So he challenged him for the throne. They battle for the throne. Eric. Now, what's kind of unique about this situation is that Eric's hubris or his rage. There's a fatal flaw that occurs. He says that I don't want to wait weeks to get all the other countries to witness this ritualistic combat. I just want him right now and settle this. So they have the fight, and Eric Killmonger, the stronger of the two, clearly the more militarily capable, decisive in battle. He doesn't fight with a shield like T'Challa does. He just has two spears, willing to take the blows in order to give him. Wins the fight. He goes for the kill blow. The Zuri character, Forrest Whitaker's character, the one who betrayed Killmonger's father 30 years ago, prevents him from killing T'Challa. Eric Killmonger, he kills Zuri, recognizes him as Uncle James, and and then he starts questioning the Wakandans, saying, this is who you choose for your king, this weak person. He can't lead you into the future, and he throws him over the cliff. So he clearly wins. He's clearly the ruler of Wakanda, and so everybody's unified, and they fall in line, even though their heart may have been with the ruler, because that has been their traditions for hundreds of years. They fall in line and get behind Eric Killmonger's character. They take him to the ritual room where he consumes the heart-shaped herb, which I'm going to say is just some super weed. Herb is a term that's synonymous with marijuana, and it does provide some healing properties. That we do get to see that, some medicinal purposes, but there's no real evidence that it does anything more than allow you to have this hallucinated dream. And that's when he's able to have that conversation with his father in the afterlife, that we're not the lost people, but it's actually the Wakandians. And when he wakes up from that, he tells the new shaman to burn all this stuff. She said we can't do that because that's for the next king. He's like, burn it. And I think he tells her to burn it because that's holding on to some superstitions that are worthless and don't benefit the people that he intends to rule. And he chokes her. Now, I think that is one of the one of the attempts to influence the minds of the viewer to be at some kind of conflict with, like, well, here's this revolutionary who said everything that I wanted to do, but now he just assaulted an old lady, right? But and then they set the room on fire, and he stands in it. And when you combine that with the devil mask that he had on with the horns, and now he's standing in fire, you're supposed to think this guy's the devil, right? At least that's the imagery that's being projected. The next scene that happens, the director chooses to show the screen upside down, and it goes the right side up. And I feel that that's a director's choice that says, things were upside down, but now that Killmonger has taken the throne, things are as they should be. And he says that, that time where we just ignored the system of white supremacy and all these oppressed people is over. And he describes what war actually is. He says, I'm going to kill everyone involved who has benefited, participated in white supremacy, including their allies, right? He just describes what war is. If we look at what has happened in the theaters of war that have been waged on other nations from this country, there are casualties of war, and that's men, women, and children. So this is a leader who's being very direct and very clear about what's going to take place in order to free and liberate and oppress people. And he says he's using the knowledge that he received from the oppressor against them, and he's going to arm all these people and fund them, that they have a spy network all over the world. And Chris, not Chris, but I believe his name is not Wasabi. I'm going to call him Chris, but the person who played Chris in the movie Get Out, who got out of the sunken place, is like, you know what? I'm with you. Let's do that. The General Okoye says that's never been our way, but that way, by not doing that, has allowed the system of white supremacy to thrive. And the two men say, you know what? The time's over. Let's go. Let's fund everything. So then we find out that T'Challa's girlfriend, she steals one of the herbs, sacred herbs, before they were all burned, and they go to the mountain king, the gorilla king. And what's interesting again is that the mother says to Nakia, don't give it to him. I think you should take it. Because it's, again, this questioning of black male authority. Like, can we really trust or rely on this black man that we're going to for help? Better that you take it. She says, I don't have an army. If she had an army, would she have taken it? But that's a question that's left in the mind. And again, it's designed to influence the audience about, can you trust these black men? So when they finally get to the king, they find out T'Challa's not dead, but he's being preserved. He's in a coma and lying in this white snow, which is a really interesting directorial choice. So the gorilla king, the mountain king, refuses the offer to accept the power for itself, because I think he also knows that there's no really magic powers with it. But they do allow the mother to give the herb to T'Challa, which does heal his body. I think, again, it may have some additional purposes. And we do see a flashback, another hallucinating scene, where he confronts his father, T'Chaka, and says that not only was he wrong, but all the people that came before him were wrong. And we're not sure what does he mean by wrong. He said he was wrong to leave the boy. Is that because if he would have brought him back, then we wouldn't have this problem? We wouldn't have created a revolutionary, and things could exist the way they always have? Or is he saying you were wrong to turn your back on the world and not open up our resources to everybody? We are clear that he's not talking about revolution, because if he was, he would just simply partner with the new ruler of Wakanda, right? And they could fight together, because that's in the choice to be made too, but that's not what happens. So in this hallucination, they cover him with white snow, pure white, and that's symbolic that this is not the hero of black people. This is somebody who is going to fight everything, and he says so clearly that his mission, when he was, again, going back to conversation when they had this exchange, that he didn't care about Claw. His number one purpose was not to allow resources to get in the hands of men like you, men who want to overturn this system of white supremacy. So they cover him with the white snow. He's resurrected miraculously, and then that leads us into like the final fight scene, where it really pits black men against black women. That's what the war is, between the warrior women who are soldiers and the border tribe. and they're fighting each other. They show Chris's character, I think his name is Wabi. I can't think of it. I'll put it in here. The border general, Chris from Get Out, running over women with a rhinoceros, right? And he gets ready to run over the Mountain King, and the black woman stands in front of the rhinoceros, which is again out of order. She's a soldier. I get that. That's how she's being portrayed, but she stands in between the black man, saving him, and he runs away, right? And then Chris asks his girlfriend or his lover, and she's like, "Would you really kill me?" And he looks about and he sees like all the people dying, and he takes a knee, which I think is also an interesting choice. He's like, I'm not gonna allow my people to die in all this bloodshed. We're gonna stop this before it goes too far. Now, T'Challa emerges and claims that I'm not dead, and I didn't yield. But that's a lie, and it's a disgrace because he knows that he was defeated in ritual combat. He's not a real king. But it allows the General Okoye to look at Eric Killmonger and say the line that I think the European audience was waiting to hear, that confirms with them, is like, your heart is too filled with hate to be king. As if his hate and his rage and if his fury is unjustified with everything that we just listed, and the oppression that's happening, and the fact that it was ignored, and that his father, that it's unjustified. It is justifiable, and it informs him about what's the right thing to do versus the wrong thing to do, which is to preserve this system. So they fight the new ruler of Wakanda, and they choose this one scene where he grabs one of the soldiers, one of the women soldiers, and cuts her throat on screen. When you saw Claw getting killed, it was off screen, but they chose to show this graphic scene, which I think is supposed to. I saw one article where he's supposed to be the new face of misogyny, because if you look at the murders or the deaths that occurred between him or these black women and him roughing him up, that's supposed to inform you that this is the bad guy. And even if you think he's the good guy, he's against black women, which is incorrect, right? So T'Challa tackles him, and there's a final fight. T'Challa, I would say, cheats because he's on familiar ground, and does this great move, stabs Eric Killmonger, and he says that's a great move. And he says, my father told me that Wakanda has the most beautiful sunsets. The Black Panther takes him to the top so he can see the sunset. And again, I talked about this earlier. He says, we can heal you. And he's like, why? So you can put me in a cage? And he says, man, you just don't get it. I'm willing to die for what I believe in. Just bury me with my ancestors. Now, what's interesting about being buried with his ancestors, it talks about the Middle Passage. And a lot of people may not know what the Middle Passage is, or about the movies Amistad that you can look at. There's a Amistad, I think, is the one that comes to mind, that talks about how brutal the Middle Passage was, about the door of no return in West Africa, where these people were put on these cargo ships, packed like cargo, no bathrooms, horrific conditions for months, vomit, human excrement, and living in those kind of conditions. Some of them survived, and some of them, rather than go into slavery, jumped over the side of the boats. They said there was so much death over these 400 years of the slave trade that sharks used to follow the ships because they know it would be fed. And if you were to drain the ocean, you could follow there's a trail of bones there right now today that you can follow between Africa and the Americas where the slave trade happened. That's how much death is there. That's how many souls aren't at rest. No reparations have been done for the worst inhumanity to man, for the Black Holocaust. And the effects of that are still being felt today. And when he says that line about, it's better, put my body in the ocean with my ancestors, and it's better to die than it is go into bondage, it tells us everything we need to know about the character. So I hope that this synopsis gives you some markers to to explore and some conversations to have around the film, and why you will look at it with a different lens and understand why you hear some people in the movie theater going, mm-hmm, I get it. And how Loki in the Marvel Universe is a hero. How Killmonger for many is a hero in this film. I think the choices, again, that the writer-directors made were some brilliant choices to be able to give a voice to this movement that is necessary, that's needed, and humanize it. Even in a Disney film that is always used as that has been very selective about how they've chosen to portray real people, the Black Panther movement, which was a revolutionary movement, and then taking a weakened or a weak character in the Black Panther, the comic book Black Panther, that actually partners up with a CIA agent to prevent the revolution from happening, or this revolt, this I don't want to say tradition, but the revolt, something that can, just, I'll have to edit that out. But who's chosen to side with the oppressor, that's what I meant to say, over liberating his people. Now, there's some ending credit scenes that, it still informs us that this is more symbolism over substance. He goes to the UN. The people at the UN aren't the ones that are suffering or that need vibranium or need liberation. It's the people that Eric Killmonger was reaching out to. But the Black Panther tells you, it's like, I'm not that dude. I'm just not that guy. And then you see, what's the last scene? The White Wolf is like a throwaway, so that's what kind of things I liked about the movie. Again, were the beautiful imagery. Hollywood has traditionally shown Africa as backwards. This one celebrates different cultures. It allows the black artist to imagine an African country had it not been interrupted by colonization or the theft of its natural resources, and what kind of superpower it could be. I think it's a great introduction that invites conversations around the Black Holocaust and what the results of it are, how things still haven't been made right. Number of references that you should look at: Stolen Legacy, Miseducation of a Negro by Carter G. Woodson, the autobiography of Malcolm X, the new Jim Crow, very important books that talks about mass incarceration and how black people have been disenfranchised by this war, quote unquote, war on drugs, particularly marijuana, that has created a population. The United States has a population of about 4%, 5%, if I'm generous, of the world population, but has 25% of its prisoners, which is insane, right? And most of those are black and brown people. And those people have been disenfranchised and cannot participate as citizens. They cannot vote. And Malcolm warned about that. He's like, it's the ballot or the bullet. So I think how you choose to look at this heroic character, Eric Killmonger, is that, do you look at that as a warning? Do you look at it as a wake-up call, for both communities to say, like, you know what, what's right is right? Or because we look at the current climate, I'm not going to get into that. I just want to lead on the movie. Thanks a lot. This is Shane Nappy Show.